When we think of red states, we often think of open land, lower costs, more freedoms, and business-friendly environments that promote jobs. What if I told you that half of the top 10 states with the most income inequality in America are GOP dominated? These states pride themselves on affordability and low taxes, but income inequality in America is widespread and affects nearly every part of our lives, from housing to health outcomes to opportunities themselves. In this video, we're counting down the top 5 GOP-dominated states with the highest levels of income inequality and showing you side by side where and how the haves and have-nots really live. This list will likely surprise you, so make sure you stick around until the end. State number 5, Kentucky. Home of the Louisville Slugger baseball bats, Kentucky Fried Chicken, and distilleries that produce 95% of the world's supply of bourbon. The state has a median household income of about $62,000, which is below the national average, and at first glance, we wouldn't expect it to rank high on inequality. However, Kentucky actually has one of the highest levels of income inequality in the Midwest. The richest 0.1% of Kentuckians control an estimated $275 billion in wealth. Louisville, the state's largest city, reflects this divide clearly. It's home to corporate headquarters like Yum Brands, GE Appliances, and Humana, and its affluent suburbs are among the wealthiest in the state. In Glenville, in Mockingbird Valley, the median household income is about $250,000, while in nearby Indian Hills, it's around $190,000. These communities include million-dollar homes, riverfront parks and neighborhoods, and a picture-perfect lifestyle. Yet, just a short drive away in West Louisville, a predominantly black community, median household incomes are about $34,000, roughly half the state average. The poverty rate is nearly 40%. West Louisville is considered a food desert, which means that healthy, fresh food is not easily accessible. In June 2023, it was reported that in an area with a population of 60,000 people, there were only 2 full-size grocery stores. For many residents, that meant if they were hungry, their quickest and most reliable options were fast food chains like McDonald's and Taco Bell, or whatever they could find at a gas station, liquor store, or dollar store. Outside the urban centers, much of Kentucky is made up of small towns and farmland, with fields of corn, soybeans, wheat, and hay stretching for miles. For residents living far from Louisville, steady job opportunities are limited. In eastern Kentucky, particularly in the Appalachian coalfield counties like Letcher, Breathitt, Harlan, Wolfe, and Perry, the collapse of the coal industry has driven decades of economic decline and population loss since the 1980s and 90s. Poverty rates in many of these counties remain above 30% according to the U.S. Census. This economic despair has fueled an addiction crisis, while repeated natural disasters from severe flooding to tornadoes have only deepened the hardship. With so few stable, well-paying jobs available to build a safety net, entire communities are left vulnerable, at times even wiped off the map because of extreme weather conditions such as the 2022 Appalachian floods. In sharp contrast, parts of northern Kentucky near Cincinnati have become some of the fastest growing and wealthiest parts of the state, benefiting from proximity to a thriving metro economy despite being on the other side of the state line. Together with Louisville, this booming region of Kentucky feels worlds away from the deep poverty and decline of eastern Kentucky. Kentucky shows how inequality cuts across regions, race, and history, from food deserts in Louisville to coal towns in Appalachia. As evident as these divides are, the reality becomes more apparent between the haves and have-nots as we move south. State number 4, Texas. Texas is growing fast, but the gap between the haves and have-nots are widening. Inequality across Texas households remains higher than the national average, and it's not hard to see why. In Austin, tech salaries are driving rapid growth as the city emerges as one of the country's leading innovation hubs, with companies like SpaceX and Tesla operating nearby. About 200 miles away is Dallas, which is positioning itself as a future financial center. Goldman Goldman Sachs is building a new $500 million campus, and the Texas Stock Exchange, which is aiming to rival Wall Street, is scheduled to begin trading in 2026. Yet, even with such strong economic hubs, inequality is deeply felt within Texas. In the state's largest city, Houston, known as the energy capital of the world, many households are struggling. In 2023, about 13.7 households lived below the poverty line, and another 29% were what's called ALICE by the United Way, families who are working but still don't earn enough to cover basic needs. Essentially, roughly 42% of Houston's households are either poor or struggling to cover basic needs. The contrast is even more visible in South Texas, the area known as the Rio Grande Valley. Hidalgo County has the highest child poverty rate in the nation, with nearly 37% of children living below the poverty line. In smaller border communities like Salida del Sol Estates, poverty rates exceed 40 to 50%, and in Sparks is over 60%. Families here mainly rely on seasonal agricultural work and low-wage service jobs in their isolated rural towns to get by, while the state's major cities continue to advance further and grow wealthier. What makes Texas stand out from other states with high inequality like Kentucky is the sheer scale of wealth available. Texas has booming activity in energy, manufacturing, tech, and real estate, generating more millionaires and comfortable six-figure earners. When that kind of prosperity exists alongside rural regions with poverty rates above 40%, the contrast is too hard to ignore. As Texas's economy and population continue to expand in the decades ahead, all eyes will be on whether that growth is dispersed more broadly. Will they be able to lift more people out of poverty, or will this divide only deepen? Time will tell. State number 3, Florida. Florida ranks third on this list of red states with the most income inequality. This is partly because, unlike Texas, Florida's wealth is concentrated in affluent enclaves, while much of the labor force is stuck in low-wage tourism, service, and agricultural jobs. Texas has old and new money at the top, along with booming industries, but it also has a broader base of middle and high-paying jobs. Florida doesn't. On the surface, the state looks like paradise. Retirees enjoying their beachside condos, tourists crowding Orlando's theme parks, and foreign visitors spending money and investing all over Miami and Palm Beach. Outside these affluent bubbles, the numbers tell a different story. According to the U.S. Census, in Miami-Dade County, the median household income is just around $72,000, which is below the six-figure salaries common in the state's wealthiest coastal zip codes. Meanwhile, the median household income for the entire state of Florida is roughly the same at around $73,331. A 2025 Harvard study found that Florida has lost nearly 60% of its affordable rentals in the last decade, replaced by luxury apartment towers marketed to high earners. An estimated 56% of Floridian households pay more than 30% of their income on rent, which makes them cost-burdened, according to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. In eastern panhandle towns in central Florida's agricultural communities, families face stagnant wages, fewer job prospects, and limited access to quality education and services. Because the state's main economic drivers are tourism, hospitality, manufacturing, and agriculture, high-growth, high-paying opportunities are scarce. While other states build their skylines with office towers, many of Florida's high-rises are luxury residential condos, which gives off the perception of glitz, glam, and affluence. However, when we consider Florida as a whole, the wealth here looks different and feels different. Much of it comes from retirees, out-of-state high earners, and foreign investors who aren't necessarily building new companies or industries, but acting more as passive consumers. For instance, back in 2023, foreign buyers accounted for nearly 18% of all residential property sales in Miami, fueling condo condo construction but doing little to diversify the job market. For many long-time residents, this means opportunities for social mobility are hard to come by, especially as living costs and rent continue to skyrocket. Florida has become a state of sharp contrasts, where retirees and investors live comfortably in beachfront condos, while service workers and farm laborers struggle to get by and the rest of the state is ignored. Let's head west now. State number 2, Mississippi. Mississippi is known to be one of the poorest states in the nation, which makes it surprising it's even on this list. The state's inequality is shaped less by billionaires at the top and more by persistent hardship across large portions of the population. The state's median household income is about $52,985, which is the lowest of any U.S. state. Rural areas in the Delta and Southwest face some of the highest poverty rates, where communities often struggle with limited job opportunities, underfunded schools, limited infrastructure, and poor access to healthcare and other resources. In towns like Clarksdale, known as the birthplace of the music genre Delta blues, poverty remains high due to many factors revolving around neglect. The median household income here is about $35,000, and more than 1/3 of residents live in poverty. Similarly, Greenville, another Mississippi Delta town, is known as a persistent poverty community, with a poverty rate of over 20% over the last 4 decades, according to the Local Initiatives Support Corporation. Even in Jackson, the state's capital, many neighborhoods have been living with failing infrastructure, roads that need repair, abandoned buildings everywhere, and under-resourced schools, despite being adjacent to wealthier suburbs. In fact, after decades of neglect, residents in Jackson have endured months without running water in recent years and continue to see discolored, contaminated water coming from their faucets. Sadly, this crisis has become a symbol of the state's broader inequality. While much of Mississippi struggles with poverty, the state also has pockets of old money, particularly along the Gulf Coast. In towns like Biloxi, Gulfport, and Ocean Springs, family fortunes built on shipping, timber, and land ownership have been passed down for generations. These coastal enclaves are dotted with historic estates, country clubs, and exclusive communities that reflect a very different Mississippi, one where wealth isn't usually new but inherited, and often shielded from the economic struggles that define much of the state. The inequality in Mississippi is largely the result of a long history of oppression and neglect of poor Black and white residents alike. We can see this when we drive along the state and see historic estates, while just hours away in the state's own capital, communities are wondering if their water is safe to drink. In Mississippi, the inequality is what we would call systemic, where entire regions have been ignored and left behind for decades. Now let's cross the state line to the red state with the worst inequality in America. This is where poverty collides not only with history but also with health and environmental disasters. State number 1, Louisiana. When we think of Louisiana, we usually don't think of wealth, especially considering it's consistently ranked as one of the poorest states in the country. But like the other 4 high inequality states on this list, the differences between the haves and have-nots are devastating if we're actually paying attention. Louisiana's economy is powered by energy, shipping, and tourism, yet the statewide median household income is almost $20,000 less than the national average at around $58,000. The richest parts of the state have median incomes in the lower to mid $100,000 range and include areas like Lewisburg, Spokane, Bayou Gauche, and Oak Hills Place. These communities are made up of affluent professionals, executives, and old money families who have benefited from Louisiana's energy and shipping industries and its colonial history. Meanwhile, the poorest areas, towns like Bastrop, Natchitoches, Opelousas, and Ruston, struggle to get by. Bastrop has the lowest median household income in the state at just around $20,000 annually, with poverty rates is in the 40% range. Why is there such a wide disparity? Louisiana's long racial history, policy, and tax regulations that favor companies and large developments over people, repeated natural disasters like hurricanes and flood events, and chronically underfunded schools and communities. Add to this generational barriers like segregation, poor healthcare systems, and a lack of investment in education. We have entire parishes struggling to make progress even during times of economic growth. Along the petrochemical corridor between Baton Rouge and New Orleans, oil and gas wealth is concentrated in the hands of executives, even as surrounding communities deal with toxic air, unsafe water, and high cancer risks. For residents of the 85-mile stretch of land along the Mississippi River known as Cancer Alley, residents are torn between fighting for the right to live in the homes they grew up in and fighting for their safety and lives. Residents here face cancer rates 50 times the national average, which is like walking into a room with 50 people and knowing that if just one of them would normally get sick, in your town, it could be every single person you know. Inequality in Louisiana isn't just about finances, it's also about health. In 2020, the state ranked among the lowest in life expectancy, with residents living nearly 4 years less than the US average. Louisiana also has one of the highest maternal mortality rates in the nation and ranks second in infant mortality, which is high for a section of a developed country. According to the Louisiana Department of Health, 98% of state residents live in a professional health shortage area. Imagine that, living in the wealthiest country in the world, but being unable to receive medical care when you need it. Few cities capture the paradox of wealth and poverty as sharply as New Orleans. On the surface, it's a global destination that generates billions from tourism and conventions, and it's celebrated worldwide for its food, music, and culture. Yet just beyond the French Quarter, many neighborhoods struggle with poverty, crime, lack of services, lack of jobs, and poor infrastructure. In fact, 20 years after Hurricane Katrina and the levee breaches devastated the city, many neighborhoods in New Orleans still contain vacant homes, blighted buildings, and overgrown lots of where homes used to be. This is what inequality looks like in Louisiana, a city that thrives on the world stage while large parts of its own community are left behind. Among the states with the most income inequality, this is the essence of the divide between the haves and have-nots. Opportunities and recovery for some, abandonment and neglect for others. Make sure you subscribe to State of America for clear and accurate insights about the state of our country.